Kogi State House of Assembly on Monday called for the sacking of the chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, Ola Olukoyede, over what the assembly described as the unprofessional handling of the corruption case against the former Kogi State Governor, Yahaya Bello. The legislators during a plenary in Lokoja condemned EFCC's siege to the Kogi State's Governor's Lodge in Abuja in an attempt to arrest Bello a few days ago. The lawmakers accused the Olukoyede-led EFCC of attempting to assassinate both Bello and the incumbent governor, Usman Ododo, by allegedly firing gunshots in an attempt to arrest Bello in Abuja. On Viewpoint, where we discover perspective and embrace dialogue, we ponder and wonder what is going on. Could there be factors playing out in the background beyond the purview of the naked eye? I'm Ola Olukoyede. With me is Odia Wahehai. How are you doing today?
Perfectly fine.
Alright, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us across our social media platform. Join us in the next phase of the show. There has been an issue going on between Yahaya Bello and EFCC, and we asked what is going on, what is happening, what is going on behind the scene that the citizens of the country do not know about. Now, to you, Odiawa, what motivations might drive Yahaya Bello to evade law enforcement despite being declared wanted by the EFCC?
Well, to begin with, we must first of all look at it. There's no smoke without fire. Definitely, the EFCC cannot just wake up out of the blues and say they were actually demanding for the presence of Yahaya Bello, former governor of the Confluence State, Kogi State. What actually is going on here is a close to 80-something billion naira, which was actually involved in maladministration of funds, where it was explicitly said that he was using the funds to actually procure school fees for the children. How far that's correct, investigations are still ongoing. Now, the EFCC on its own part has actually tried to apprehend him. Might we recall just last week or a few days back, he was actually going to the EFCC to actually report himself. At the time, the EFCC chairman wasn't present, so he had to leave. Now, on the case of whereby it's a case whereby he had to evade the law, it's not a case of could it also be that he's actually abusing the immunity clause, which actually he's now even out of office, or trying to exploit the immunity clause, which is also from his godson, who he actually anointed on the seat there. By this now I mean Usman Ododo. So these are conflicting issues concerning why he's actually evading the law. Secondly, we should also look at, we should also look at the fact that he's highly connected, politically connected. It's a case whereby he can just make a phone call, and he is also making sure that his fingers are always on deck. You could even see when shots were fired at him in a video which was reported online that the State House of Assembly had to even stand in the gap. Why? Because they are also pro-Bello.
All right, thank you very much. But then looking at the situation of things, I know that EFCC is one of the section in Nigeria that are allowed to, use the law as much as possible without interference from the political parties. Do you think there's a political interference in this situation?
Well, I will say there is. Why? Because if there was no political interference, definitely the EFCC would have been able to execute its affairs, without, or execute the affairs seamlessly. Because looking at it, for instance, someone is apprehended. As you're getting to the station, we watch these in movies, and it's happened. As you're taking the convicted fellow or the apprehended fellow to the station, a phone call comes in. He's been released, but that fellow is actually guilty. This is the connection we are talking about. Now, this actually undermines the efforts of the EFCC. It therefore means that even the EFCC, whatever acts that are in place, which are recognized by the Constitution, acts to actually be amended to make sure that the EFCC on its own part is fully armed to actually make sure that upon apprehension of anybody, they can go against anybody, irrespective of who the fellow is. It's not a case of whether the fellow is untouchable or not. That's what's actually playing out here. So there are political interference in the whole thing, which are actually limiting the efforts of the EFCC and making sure that the boots of whoever is to be apprehended is actually landing heavily on the EFCC, and they are still standing feet.
All right. So how does the relationship between Yahaya Bello and Governor Usman Ododo complicate the legal situation surrounding the EFCC's efforts to apprehend him?
Well, like I said earlier, there was in April, might we recall, Yahaya Bello's private residence was there was a siege around his private residence in
Residence.
in the FCT rather. I beg your pardon, and it was a case of he had to be answerable to what he was being held accountable for, which was also the mismanagement of funds in Kogi State, or Kogi State funds rather. Now it has repeated itself again in the month of September, and this time around it was a case whereby he had to go over to be in the governor's lodge. The governor's lodge now can be likened to an embassy in any country. For instance, now a war-torn country, let's use Ukraine for instance now. You have the embassy or the Nigerian embassy there, and I'm looking for shelter within Ukraine. The next embassy I need to run to will be the Nigerian embassy. I can't go to the Zambian embassy. It would make sense. So I, as a former governor, who should also be entitled to such privileges, I now take advantage of that fact. Now, that's the abuse of the immunity clause also, and also exploiting of the present governor's immunity clause. These are things we should also look at analytically. Now, being a godson, there's no how the godson will deny the godfather, who has actually anointed him upon the Kogi seat, Kogi #1 seat. So bringing him in now on board will now be a case of you can't come and harass the governor's lodge. That is where the EFCC now made a mistake on his own part, where shots were fired. So
Okay.
I will say on the part of the EFCC, it was a level of incompetency, let me put it that way. And the Kogi State Government Lodge actually made sure they tactically made use of the law. Why? Because the lodge cannot be, attacked. Remember, I likened it to the embassy. So you can imagine a world power like US now, its embassy being threatened. Definitely that US SEALs and Marines will definitely come into the place. That is where the deployment of security agencies, which are superior to even the EFCC, will now come in place to fight on behalf of the governor. The governor has every right to protect everyone within the governor's lodge. That's the way I see it. So that's the whole similarity or connection or connectivity between Bello and Usman.
Okay, so looking at the situation of things, I feel that there are security agencies in the lodge, which means there's probability that these people attacked the EFCC first. Why is it that Ola Olukoyede had to take, I won't even say Ola Olukoyede took responsibility for it, because if he actually took responsibility, he would have resigned. But then the news said he was sacked. Can we say that the government are trying to make it look as though Ola Olukoyede didn't do the right thing? Because when talking about the situation of things now, the EFCC already nabbed the former governor of the state, and that is the reason why they went for the arrest. Now that the government sacked him, not that he resigned, can we say that the government is trying to hide something from the people?
I began by stating earlier on that Bello on his own part is highly placed and connected. That's one.
But then the law is not supposed to be above anybody.
Yes, the law is not meant to be above anybody, agreed. But a situation whereby the untouchables now tend to flaunt or defy the laws of the land, a sense of anarchy will now begin to set in. Why? Because money talks. That's the way I see it now. The highest bidder will actually get what he or she wants. So there are so many sides to the whole thing. Number one, the EFCC firing shots, and there were alleged claims that, okay, the DSS and the police had also fired shots also. It happened in the dead of the night. So we cannot actually say who pulled the trigger. And before you pull the trigger, as a security operative, you must not engage. That's the number one rule. You must not engage unless maybe someone must have attacked. So the fellow who must have attacked now is the question of case of denial. We've seen this happen before, whereby this party begins to start the blame game issue of he fired first, the other fellow fired. But these are sister agencies which ought to reciprocate. And being sister agencies, they ought to work in a teamed up manner. So the DSS on its own part, the police on its own part, and the EFCC on its own part, we should look at it as a case of all fingers are not equal. Each person wants to claim superiority. So you can't imagine the EFCC, which is actually going after financial crimes, or compare the EFCC, which is going after financial crimes, with the DSS, which is going after high-profile crimes, which has to do with assassinations, dead killings, or even the police, which is also going after civic issues, which involves petty crimes also. These are factors you should also weigh in and look at.
All right, thank you very much. So in what ways might the constitutional immunity of governors impact the enforcement of laws against alleged financial misconduct?
Well, I will feel laws should actually be in place to put people in check. But we are in a country, or we are birthed in a country where people have no regard for the law. Everyone is above the law, particularly when your money talks. You can get away with it. So the governors, on their own part, I think there should be a modification on the constitution regarding this immunity clause. Because once the governors get into office, they tend to exploit this thing and abuse it in the process. Why? Because power intoxicates and absolute power corrupts. So by the time you imagine governors getting there, they're only saying they're only going for one term, which is 4 years. But by the time they begin to taste power and see what they can do, they look for another term.
Yeah.
And once they get that term, they can't get a third term bid, which of course is defined that you cannot seek a third term. They look for how to bring a godson. That's where they become godfathers, to make sure that whatever they put in place has actually or will actually continue to be perpetuated. So that is the card now that is being played out in Kogi State now. If we look at Bello, who has now put in Usman.
All right. So how might political connection influence the action of law enforcement agencies like the EFCC in high-profile cases such as that of Yahaya Bello?
I began mentioning earlier on where someone is apprehended,
Yeah.
and when the fellow gets to the station, or even before he even gets into the van, being whisked to the station, a call comes in, probably from one top echelon, and it's like, okay, order from above. The fellow is free. It could be a superior, it could be the police, it could be the army, it could be the navy. So the fellow you're even arresting, that's why this question will come up on the streets of Lagos or anywhere in the part of the country. Do you know who I am?
Yeah.
So when you hear, do you know who I am? It's a case of, okay, I have people or I have someone. So that someone you now have must be a high profile person. So imagine someone who has a colonel in place, who has a phone number of a commissioner of police or even the IGP himself. And then he say, sir, I'm in so-so place. Or ma, I'm in so-so place. Just a phone call to the next person, to the next person. And the fellow is out of jail. So it undermines the constitutionality of the law enforcement agencies. The acts which are stipulated in place to make sure that these security agencies should actually function to optimal capacity will now be undermined. And once they are undermined, people, even the common man, will not even have regard or respect for them. And they cannot even run to them. Why? Because money, like I said, money will always talk.
All right. So what alternative strategies could the EFCC employ to ensure compliance from individuals who refuse to respond to invitations or warrants? Because looking at the situation of things, there's probability that the EFCC had already sent invitation to Yahaya Bello and he didn't go to meet them for probably investigation or interrogation. In this case, what strategies can EFCC employ to ensure compliance from individuals?
Well, I should begin by stating that if individuals are defying being summoned or evading being summoned by the EFCC, there should be authorities that are in place to make sure they could report to. Let's use the US for instance now. You have the Department of, for instance, let's use the NYPD now, New York Police Department. They can apprehend someone, and when they apprehend that fellow, someone now comes in and, meanders, and that fellow who they apprehended is free. Before you say, Jack, the FBI comes in, that's the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI is higher than the NYPD. Once the FBI takes over and there's some kind of maligning, that is when you now have the Department of Justice coming in. So I think we should have institutions in place that are much more higher, where they can even be visibly seen and know, okay, yes, if the EFCC is actually not living up to expectations, there should be a superior body which is actually going to take care of this particular issue which the EFCC has not been able to take care of. Peradventure, this other body too has not been able to take care of that body. There should also be another body which is going to be set up. So those are the strategies that should be in place, whereby the EFCC is not only reliant on itself, it knows that there's a father to run to and there's a grandfather to run to.
Okay. Now let's talk about the police. What role do the police and the Department of State Security Services play in supporting or undermining the effort of the EFCC in pursuing fugitives?
Well, if we look at it, historically speaking, the police force is one of the oldest forces in the country.
Nigeria, yeah.
So it's not a case of you just bring them over and treat them like a pushover. The EFCC was just set up in the 2000s by the Obasanjo administration. So you cannot just come in and begin to feel you want to jilt the police force. Why? Because they will feel they have more say. They've been in the game concerning security more than you have been. They've been in the game dealing with even financial crimes before you were even established. So we had the likes of Operation Sweep back then in the 90s. These were people who were actually going in to deal with drug barons and even also money laundering cases. Money laundering cases now have been shifted over. That responsibility now has been saddled over to the EFCC. On the part of the DSS on its own part, the DSS on its own part is also a heavier secretive arm. You hear the Department of Secret Services. So they don't just go after people anyhow. They go after high-profile people who are assumed deadly. And these deadly people, once they go after them, they make sure that they actually go in. It's a jungle affair when they go for their hunting of their prey. Let me put it that way. So the kind of people they go for, you cannot compare the kind of people they go for with the kind of people the EFCC go for. Now, if you look at it now, the DSS, they are mostly attached to high-profile individuals, either celebrities, government officials, even likewise the police. So they perform similar functions. These functions in which the police and the DSS perform, the EFCC cannot even perform also on its own part. They are just after the financial crime aspect. For instance, now you doctor a certificate whereby there's a document they have when you're registering your company with the CAC. They call it SCUMO. So if you don't have this document in place, when you go doing large transactions running from tens of millions to hundreds of millions, once you don't have that document in place, EFCC will come knocking. So that's where there's a case of maladministration of funds or money laundering cases. So we need to make sure that we know how different these security agencies are. So the police and the DSS on its own part, they see themselves as a higher version of the EFCC. So the EFCC being just set up just yesterday, even though fine early 2000, this 2024, they cannot meet up with what the DSS and the police has actually seen.
Right. So now, what are the potential consequences for Nigeria's political landscape if allegations of political interference in law enforcement are substantiated?
The consequences will be anarchy, because the essence of law is to make sure that some excesses are put in check. Laws are made so that the excesses of people are not, gone beyond the boundary. If not, look at it from the scriptures itself. They say, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not. Why? Because these things are really, really offensive. And as offensive as they are, it can push someone into killing, which is another offense also. So when these laws are made and institutions are set up to make sure that these laws are actually in place and followed, there are reasons for it. Peradventure, these laws are absent, and these institutions which are to implement these laws are also absent, there's going to be a state of anarchy. And once there's anarchy, the weak will survive. It's a case of might is right. And once might is right, people who are even intellectually sound to promote advancement will no longer be there. So I would say, in summary or conclusively speaking, anarchy is always going to set in if there are no institutions in place. When the political landscape is undermined, anarchy is going to take the reign.
All right, thank you very much. Well, we've heard it all. It's been an unhealthy drama between Yahaya Bello and the EFCC, and we can only ask for transparency from the government and asking for the government to allow the EFCC do their job. And that will be all for now on Viewpoint, where we discover perspective and embrace dialogue. I'm Ola Olukoyede, and with me has been Odiawa Hehai. Thank you for joining me on the show.
Always welcome.
Thanks for